Hello, glad to see you on the channel. Subscribe, give a like, and don't forget to leave a comment. Enjoy watching.
I'd been sitting across from that overfed little prick for maybe 40 seconds when I knew exactly how it was going to go. Jeremy Levinson, son of Carl Levinson, founder of Levinson Strategies, sat back in his oversized leather chair like he'd just closed a billion-dollar deal, not like he was about to kick out the guy who basically was the company's backbone for over a decade. He wore that smug half-smile you usually see on country club assholes when they tip their caddies with singles. He started with, "Look, I respect everything you've done here, man." And from that moment on, I knew I was done. You don't start a conversation like that unless you're about to twist the knife and try to make it sound like a high five. I didn't say anything at first, just let him talk. I watched his mouth move while my brain cataloged every stupid framed quote on his wall. Innovation doesn't sleep. Think like a disruptor. If you're not growing, you're dying. Jesus, this kid was a walking TED Talk. He said the company was moving in a new direction, that my role had evolved past necessity, and that it was time for new voices to take the lead. That last part really got me, new voices. Meaning him. The guy who'd shown up 2 years ago with his MBA and Bluetooth headset, thinking he was the next Jobs or Musk because he once convinced a client to switch to Slack. And then came the cherry on top, the line that stuck in my ribs like a splinter I couldn't pull out. He leaned forward, elbows on that expensive reclaimed wood desk, and said, "You're not family. You'll never get it." Like that was some sacred truth. Like I hadn't worked birthdays, weekends, and damn near missed my daughter's graduation to cover for Carl when he was in the hospital. Like I hadn't hauled that place through 2 restructurings, 3 major client meltdowns, and a full-blown market crash while Jeremy was still doing keg stands in his fraternity basement. I didn't say much. That's what pissed him off most, I think. I just stood up, buttoned my jacket, looked him in the eye, and said, "Well, good luck with the new voices." I smiled, not because I was happy, but because I knew that silence and a smile can burn hotter than shouting when someone expects a scene. He wanted a reaction, something to write up in the HR summary. Instead, I gave him nothing. As I walked out of that office, past the open-floor layout and the glass-walled conference rooms we all used to joke about, I felt this strange calm settle over me. It was like someone had finally turned off a noise I'd gotten used to ignoring. I grabbed the small box they'd already packed for me, as if this had been planned, and walked out the front door like it was any other Tuesday. But hey, race the thing. You don't give 12 years to a place and just leave. Not really. Pieces of you stay behind. In spreadsheets. In templates. In people's memories. In little systems no one else really understands, because you built them quietly, to make life easier for everyone. You walk out with a box, sure, but a lot of what you did, the real value, that doesn't fit inside. On the train home, I didn't feel anger. Not at first. Mostly I felt empty. Not broken. Not wounded. Just done. Like I'd run some long, thankless race, and at the end, instead of a medal, someone handed me a cold cup of water and said, "Now get lost." And the worst part? I wasn't even surprised. This had been coming ever since Carl Sr. got sick and stepped back. Jeremy had been circling like a hawk since day one. All fake smiles and talk about modernizing the culture. He didn't understand what made the place work, but he thought if he changed enough fonts and ran enough Zoom happy hours, the clients would stay. What he never got, what he still doesn't get, is that it wasn't the branding that made us strong. It was people like me, quiet grinders, relationship builders, folks who knew the client's kids' names and remembered birthdays without needing a CRM. And the kicker? Not one damn person in that office looked up when I left. Not a word, not a nod, not even Sheila from payroll, who I once helped cover rent during a bad divorce. Maybe they didn't know what to say. Maybe they were scared Jeremy would turn on them next. Or maybe, and this one hurt more, they just didn't care. I'd become part of the furniture. Reliable, comfortable, easy to ignore, until I was gone. Be honest. Have you ever dreamed of walking out and watching the place fall apart without you? Or better yet, making sure it does? I spent that night alone on the back porch, drinking a beer that tasted more like metal than malt, staring at the stars, and trying to figure out what the hell just happened. My wife had passed 3 years earlier. Cancer. Fast, mean, and ugly. My daughter was in college on the other side of the country. And now, the one constant I had, the job I gave more to than I probably should have, was just gone. For the next week, I did nothing. Woke up late. Watched old westerns. Ate whatever I felt like. And for the first time in years, My shoulders didn't feel like someone was pressing down on them with both hands. But freedom, let me tell you, is a funny thing. It tastes good at first, crisp and cold like the first sip of bourbon. But if you don't do something with it, it starts to rot. It turns into this bitter reminder that you've got nowhere to be. And just when I thought maybe I could let it all go, maybe just fade into the background in live quiet, the emails started coming in. They were small at first. Just a couple of old clients checking in, asking how I was, if I was still in the game. One even said, "Jeremy's been fumbling some things." I didn't respond. Not yet. But I read every word, and I saved every message. Because something was stirring inside me. Not vengeance, not at first. Just curiosity. How fast could things fall apart without the guy they said wasn't family? Turns out, pretty damn fast. 12 years ago, I walked through the glass doors of Levinson Strategies wearing a discount suit, clutching a worn leather portfolio, and trying to ignore the sick feeling that comes from betting your future on a handshake and a job title that sounded more important than it was. Project Development Lead, which basically meant I was expected to organize chaos, put out fires, and smile while doing it, even if the fire started with someone else lighting a cigar on a pile of client documents. But I was hungry back then, not for power or prestige, but for something real, a place to belong, to build, to matter. And Carl Levinson Sr., back then, made it feel like that kind of place existed. Carl was the old-school type in the best way possible. He remembered birthdays without being reminded, shook hands like he meant it, and had this ability to make you feel like what you said in a meeting actually mattered, even when you were dead wrong. He once told me, during my third week on the job, "I don't need brilliance, I need consistency." The guy who shows up every day and gives a damn will outlast the genius who only works when he feels like it. That stuck with me. It still does. I took that to heart, maybe more than I should have. I missed my daughter's first piano recital because Carl needed someone to fly to Denver for a supplier crisis. I skipped every summer vacation 3 years running because we were onboarding a massive retail client, and I was the only one who could translate their scattered wish list into a functioning roadmap. I told myself, every time, this matters. You're building something that lasts. And for a long time, I believed it. Hell, I felt it. Clients called me directly because they trusted me, not because of my title, but because they knew I'd pick up at 9 at night and actually listen. Over time, I became more than a manager. I was a translator between the vision and the chaos. Carl trusted me to speak on his behalf when he was out. He'd bring me into meetings not because I had the flashiest ideas, but because I could tell when someone was lying and when a timeline was smoke and mirrors. I never wanted his job, never asked for promotions, never played the politics. I figured loyalty would be enough. And for a while, it was. Then came the diagnosis, pancreatic cancer. Quick and cruel. One day he was chewing out a vendor in a boardroom with that calm steel in his voice, and the next he was half his weight and too tired to finish a sentence. The change inside the company was slow at first, like a house settling in a storm. Meetings got shorter. Decisions got slower. Then came the whispers. His son's been brought in to help steer the ship. Jeremy. Fresh out of business school with buzzwords still steaming off him and a vision that looked suspiciously like a PowerPoint deck recycled from someone else's TED Talk. Jeremy walked into the office with that jawline confidence, shiny loafers, and a laptop that probably cost more than my first car. He didn't ask questions. He didn't listen. He announced. From day one, it was, "We're streamlining processes, and we need to modernize operations." No one quite knew what the hell that meant, but it sounded just official enough that people nodded like they understood. Then came the slide decks, the reorg charts, the new team leads who all seemed to be his friends from school or guys he met at some tech summit in Austin. He started cutting out the people who built the damn place. First, it was Larry from procurement, who'd been there longer than the wallpaper. Then Denise from marketing, who could write copy in her sleep that still beat the fancy agencies Jeremy kept hiring. They were called strategic reductions, and they always came with a free lunch and a smile right before the security badge stopped working. People started walking on eggshells, smiling too hard, laughing at his dumb startup jokes like their lives depended on it. Because in a way, they did. I kept my head down, told myself I could ride it out. That maybe Jeremy just needed time to understand how things really worked. I'd seen guys like him before, all flash, no grit. But this one had power, and he wielded it with that special kind of arrogance that only comes when you've never had to fail on your own dime. He hated the systems I'd built, called them clunky and legacy. He once said, "You guys did a great job for a different era," like we were a bunch of veterans clinging to our rotary phones. Never mind that those systems were the reason we hit our targets 3 quarters in a row. Never mind that the clients loved the personal touch we'd spent years perfecting. Jeremy didn't care about that. He cared about making the company look sexy enough to pitch to investors. And I started to see the writing on the wall. Fewer meeting invites. More strategy sessions I wasn't looped into. One day, a junior analyst I trained was promoted above me. Another day, a client I had spent 5 years nurturing was reassigned to a client engagement director who couldn't find their name in a CRM without help. I should have left then. I should have walked out when Carl looked me in the eyes during his last week in the office and said, "Take care of this place. It needs people like you." Because the truth was, Jeremy didn't want people like me. He wanted noise. He wanted shiny. He wanted credit. But I stayed. Like an old dog loyal to a house that was no longer home. I stayed because I believed in what we built. And that, maybe more than anything, was my mistake. I thought loyalty meant something. I thought the years I gave, the missed moments, the stress, the grind, were a kind of investment. I was wrong. Jeremy wasn't trying to evolve the company. He was trying to erase it and build something he could put his name on. And guys like me, we were just reminders that he didn't build it from scratch. He didn't want us in the room. He wanted us in the past. The thing about ripping out a foundation is that at first, everything looks fine. For a little while, the walls stay up, the lights stay on, and people keep going about their business like nothing's wrong. But eventually, the cracks start to show. Not big dramatic ones at first, just tiny shifts and strains, the kind of subtle misalignments only someone who's been around long enough to know how things should feel would notice. And that's exactly what started happening at Levinson Strategies within 3 months of me being pushed out the door by Jeremy and his big ideas. At first, it was just whispers. A client who used to call me on Friday evenings to walk through a product roadmap suddenly couldn't get a straight answer from the new engagement team. One of the big retail accounts, the kind that took 3 years of careful relationship building and a dozen rounds of face-to-face meetings, started dropping hints that they were considering other options. Internally, I heard from an old friend in IT that the new project tracking tool Jeremy insisted on had already blown 3 deadlines and somehow duplicated every entry from Q1. And still, Jeremy strutted around like he was running a Fortune 100 company, not a mid-sized consultancy that used to run on trust, not hype. I stayed quiet. I didn't respond to the first few emails that trickled into my inbox. I didn't call anyone back, not at first. I wasn't looking for revenge. Honestly, I was still figuring out how to sleep past 6:30 without feeling guilty. I read books I'd forgotten I owned, fixed a leaky faucet that had been driving me nuts for 2 years, and even started going on early morning walks like some kind of retired widower with a podcast and nowhere to be. But somewhere around the 4th or 5th message, always polite, always a little confused, asking where I'd gone and whether I was still in the game, something started to itch under my skin. The breaking point came on a Wednesday morning, halfway through a cup of overbrewed coffee, when I got a message from Hank Simons. Hank ran a third-generation manufacturing firm out in Ohio that specialized in precision metal parts for aerospace clients. Old-school guy, called people kid, even when they were 40, and didn't trust anyone who wore loafers without socks. We'd worked together for over 8 years, and though we weren't exactly friends, there was a kind of earned respect between us. The kind that only comes from late nights solving supplier disasters and being honest when everyone else was bullshitting. Hank's message was short, like always. Heard you're out. That true? Need a hand over here. Not official, just someone who knows how we tick. It was the first time in months that I felt something like a pulse. I waited a few hours before writing back, kept it simple. I'm around. What's going on? 20 minutes later, I was on the phone with him, and the cracks turned out to be far deeper than I'd realized. Jeremy's new account team had promised Hank's people a full automation overhaul, leaner processes, faster output, lower costs, all delivered within 6 weeks. Problem was, they had no clue what Hank's systems even looked like. They hadn't even visited the plant. They were trying to run a customized implementation based on a generic template from a tech blog, and they were charging triple what we used to. Hank wasn't mad. Hank was done. He wanted help cleaning up the mess before it cost him a contract with Boeing. So I flew out that Friday, no fanfare, no contracts. Just me, a laptop, and a clipboard. And it felt damn good to get my hands dirty again. The factory floor smelled like oil and sweat and progress, and the moment I stepped into that world, I realized how badly I'd missed doing something real. I didn't promise miracles. I didn't make a deck or suggest a culture reset. I just listened, asked the right questions, and fixed what I could. Over the next few weeks, one call turned into three. Three turned into 10. Clients I hadn't spoken to since my exit started popping up in my inbox with stories that sounded way too familiar. Delayed deliverables, ghosted messages, inflated invoices, and young hotshots who talked a lot but didn't deliver much. Nobody said the words out loud, but I could feel the question in all of them. Where the hell did you go? And can you come back? I wasn't building a plan. Not then. I was still holding on to some shred of pride, telling myself this wasn't about getting even. But each conversation made it harder to ignore the truth. Without me, the whole operation was slowly bleeding out, and Jeremy, the golden child, couldn't even see the damage through his mirrored sunglasses and startup swagger. And maybe that should have been enough. Maybe I should have let it keep unraveling on its own, watched from a distance while the thing I helped build crumbled under the weight of its own arrogance. But here's the thing. I wasn't raised to walk away from a mess I could fix, even if the mess wasn't mine. And deep down, I knew this wasn't about nostalgia or even payback. It was about proving to them, to myself, that the work I did mattered. That you don't just replace loyalty with a buzzword and expect the machine to run the same. So I kept answering calls. I started keeping notes. I organized my calendar, something I hadn't done since leaving. I wasn't going back to the way things were. That version of me was gone. But I was ready for something new. Something quiet. Something sharp. Jeremy didn't know it yet, but the cracks were spreading. And soon, the whole thing was going to cave in. There's a kind of power that doesn't announce itself with flashy titles or glass-cased corner offices, the quiet kind. The kind that moves through relationships, handshakes, and long-forgotten favors repaid in coffee shops and late-night phone calls. That's the kind of power I'd built over 12 years in that company. And while Jeremy thought he'd stripped it away with a smug little meeting and a pat on the back, he never realized something fundamental. People don't follow titles. They follow trust. After I helped Hank stabilize his systems and save face with Boeing, word started spreading in the kind of circles where news travels fast, but quietly. These weren't the startup kids with app ideas and passive income dreams. These were factory owners, distribution heads, operations directors, the blue-collar, white-collar hybrids who actually make things work while other people take the credit. They started reaching out, cautious at first, like someone feeling around for a light switch in a dark room. Most of them didn't even ask for help directly. They just wanted to catch up or hear what I was working on. But their voices carried something I hadn't heard in a long time, hope. And maybe a little desperation. That's when I started keeping a list. Not on a spreadsheet or a cloud drive, nothing traceable. Just a worn, leather-bound notebook I kept in my desk drawer, next to an old brass Zippo and a photo of my daughter on her first day of high school. Each name I added had a reason. Maybe they'd reached out after a failed rollout. Maybe they'd lost confidence in Jeremy's team. Maybe they were just fed up with being talked down to by fresh graduates who didn't know how to read a logistics report without Google open on the side. But every single one of them had history with me, and more importantly, trust. The tipping point came when a guy named Armand Diaz, who ran logistics for a national chain of auto parts suppliers, sent me an encrypted PDF marked confidential. Now Armand wasn't the type to send files lightly. He was a stickler for process and had been a loyal client under Carl's leadership for nearly a decade. I opened the file and felt a chill run up my spine. It was a breakdown of billing discrepancies over the last 6 months, comparing quotes signed with what was actually charged. Some line items were inflated by 30, even 40%. And the cherry on top? It had Jeremy's electronic signature all over it, bundled with vague consulting fees and strategic optimization surcharges that no one could seem to explain. I knew this wasn't just bad management anymore. This was fraud, dressed up in corporate lingo and hidden under a veneer of innovation. I printed the file, old school, and locked it in a drawer. Then I called in a favor from a lawyer friend named Denise, someone I'd helped land her first real client back in the day when she was fresh out of law school and unsure how to price her time. She looked through the documents and whistled low. "He's either an idiot or a crook," she said. "Possibly both. Either way, if these clients want out, they have a case." We didn't move quickly. That was the key. Jeremy was expecting confrontation, a loud complaint, a blog post, some social media nonsense. But what we did was different. We moved in whispers. I started talking to the clients on the list, one by one, careful and quiet. I laid out their options, showed them the numbers, explained the exit strategies Denise had crafted. No pressure. Just information. They made their own decisions. Some of them broke ties that week. Others needed time, board meetings, legal review, internal cleanup. But over the next 2 months, 7 major accounts quietly terminated their contracts with Levinson Strategies. No drama, no fireworks, just polite emails and signed terminations, with some even waiving the required notice fees. And Jeremy? He didn't see it coming. Not until the revenue report started dipping, and even then, he blamed market fluctuations and seasonal trends. The funniest part, if you can call it that, was that I still hadn't taken a dime from any of them. Not officially. I wasn't running a business. I wasn't building a competitor. I was just helping, cleaning up a mess I hadn't made, but sure as hell understood better than anyone left in that building. But there was one client I hadn't reached out to yet, one I'd been saving for the end. Dixon Randall Freight. They were our biggest logistics account, and I'd personally overseen their integration with our analytics systems back in the day. They were also the most loyal, but I'd heard whispers they were unhappy. When I finally got on a call with their COO, a sharp-tongued woman named Lynn, she didn't even let me finish my opening before she dropped the hammer. "We're pulling out," she said. "Next quarter. It's a mess. Nothing works, nobody listens, and frankly, I miss the days when you used to call me before we had a problem, not 3 weeks after." I told her I wasn't with the company anymore. Her response? "I know. That's why I'm calling you." So I added them to the list, even though they technically added themselves. That made 8. 8 accounts gone, quietly and cleanly. And once Dixon Randall left, the hole in Jeremy's profit sheet was going to be too big to patch with jargon and enthusiasm. I should have felt triumphant. I should have popped a bottle or done something celebratory. But instead, I just stared at the list that night. The names, the notes, the little check marks I'd added in the margins. And I felt something heavier than pride. Something closer to grief. I wasn't destroying something. I was watching something destroy itself, piece by piece, from the inside out. And all I did was show the truth, the rot behind the shine, the weight behind the smile. Jeremy built a company on mirrors and noise. I built one on trust and sweat. And when the dust finally settled, he'd still have the office. But I'd have the people. And that, in the end, would be the thing that mattered most. It didn't take long before Jeremy figured out something was off, not just off in the sense of a bad quarter or a couple of shaky client reviews, but off in the way that keeps a man up at night, pacing the house in overpriced sweatpants and wondering who's pulling strings behind the curtain. The company's numbers were slipping fast. The investor meetings had turned from chest-puffing strategy sessions to uncomfortable interrogations. And his once adoring team had started giving each other sideways glances in meetings whenever he opened his mouth to talk about growth velocity or scaling agility. And when ego starts cracking, panic leaks out in ugly ways. He didn't come after me directly, at least not at first, probably because someone in legal advised him not to poke the bear while clients were still peeling off quietly like dry paint. But then the rumors started. Little whispers dressed up as concern. "We're hearing he's trying to poach clients. It's a smear campaign, and he's just bitter. He's sabotaging us because he couldn't handle change." They were clumsy, desperate, and about 3 months too late. The clients weren't listening, not to him. Because when people trust you, really trust you, they don't need a rebuttal. They know who you are by how you showed up when it counted, not by what someone says after they've already failed them. Still, hearing my name dragged through the dirt wasn't exactly pleasant. I'd built my reputation the hard way. Through every midnight flight, every saved account, every call answered when no one else bothered. But this was a tantrum dressed up as strategy. And the people who mattered saw it for what it was. By the time the 4th quarter rolled around, Jeremy was knee-deep in damage control. The investor calls were shorter. The optimism in his voice had a crackle of fear running through it. The board had started circling like sharks sensing blood in the water. Then came the layoffs, not the strategic ones, not the quiet trimming of fat. These were the kind that made headlines in trade magazines and sparked chain emails full of disbelief and bitterness. Whole departments gutted. Senior staff blindsided. Morale cratered. Jeremy tried to spin it with words like streamlining and pivoting to a lean model, but everyone knew what it really meant. The golden boy had lost control of the wheel, and the brakes were out. In the middle of it all, I got a call I wasn't expecting. Carl Levinson Sr. wanted to see me. I hadn't heard his voice since the day I walked out. Honestly, I wasn't sure I'd ever hear from him again. He'd retired fully by then, living out near the coast in a quiet place with too many windows and too little company. I made the drive in silence, unsure what I'd say, unsure why I even agreed to go. He looked smaller than I remembered. That larger-than-life presence had shrunk down to something fragile, but the eyes were still the same as sharp, tired, and full of weight. We didn't shake hands. We didn't need to. He motioned for me to sit, and we sat in silence for a while, just the two of us and the sound of gulls outside the window. "You didn't deserve what happened," he finally said. His voice was thinner, but steady. I thought I raised him better. I didn't say anything at first. There wasn't much to say. He knew it. I knew it. But hearing it from him, that mattered more than I expected. I thought if I handed him something stable, he went on, he'd grow into it, build on it. Instead, he burned through goodwill like it was fuel. "He never wanted what you built," I said, not out of bitterness, but honesty. "He wanted the credit, not the work." Carl nodded, slowly, eyes fixed on the floor. "I built that company for people like you," he said, "not for people like him." We talked a while longer, not about revenge or blame, but about legacy, about what lasts and what doesn't. And when I left, he gripped my hand with a strength that surprised me. "Thank you," he said. That was all. But it landed with the kind of finality that closes a book you know you'll never read again. Back in town, the fallout continued. Jeremy tried one last pivot, rebranding, new leadership language, bold new strategies. But none of it landed. The clients had moved on, the talent had scattered, and the money, well, the money was whispering about mergers and buyouts. The company that had once stood on trust was now just another cautionary tale, featured in webinars about leadership gone wrong and the dangers of nepotism unchecked. One morning, a few weeks later, I found myself in my usual coffee shop. I hadn't been there much during the fallout, something about old habits and fresh wounds. But that day, I felt calm. I ordered the same thing I always had, sat by the window like I used to, and pulled out my notebook. Not the client list, that was long gone. Just a plain page, clean and waiting. A few minutes later, someone tapped my shoulder. I turned and saw Erin, one of the sharpest operations managers I'd ever worked with, someone who'd survived 4 restructurings and still managed to keep a sense of humor. Her eyes widened like she'd seen a ghost. "You look happy," she said, more surprised than anything. I just smiled, sipped my coffee, and nodded toward the empty seat across from me. "Not bad," I said, "for someone who'll never be family."